Hello again, Plaid friends. Welcome back to the www.plaidavenger.com, where we just don't want to hear the news. We want to understand the news. And holy guacamole, there's a hell load of news coming out of Central Asia right now of great note across the board, affecting multiple countries, multiple regions, and the world. Of course, I'm talking about the disaster in Afghanistan, but now there's a disaster in Pakistan as well. The NATO troops are losing to the Taliban in Afghanistan. The U.S. is getting its ass handed to it in Afghanistan by the Taliban. But right this second, actually, Pakistan is invading itself. What? How do you invade yourself? It's invading Waziristan, a part of its own country. What? And actually, in the last 48 hours, some people from Balochistan, also in Pakistan, may have set off a bomb, killing some people in Iran. What in the hell? How are all of these things related? It's a very good question, and they are all related, and I want you to understand why that is. This part of the world is such a freaking mess, and it now affects so many simultaneous stories that I'm going to make a 3-part series just describing what's going on. And let's entitle this Af-Pak Insanity, Borderline Chaos. Woo! This is almost too good to be true. So Af-Pak Insanity, Borderline Chaos, Part 1, Places. Let's just talk about places that they're talking about in the news and get a sense of where these things are, what's going on there, and how they got to be that way, because you can't understand what's going on now unless you kind of understood how they got to this point. The places of point that I really want you to get to know by the end of this Plaidcast are this places called Balochistan or Balochistan, the FATA, the Federally Administered Tribal Areas, and the NWFP, Northwest Frontier Provinces. These are all parts of Pakistan. This is where the action is. Pakistan is now invading a place in its own country called Waziristan as well, which is a subpart of FATA. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go to the map, shall we? Because we're talking about places. The rest of this Plaidcast is going to be a series of maps as I describe what you're seeing. Are you ready? Let's go. To start, this blue zone is the area we're talking about. This is the Af-Pak Insanity, Borderline Chaos. This blue zone, parts of Afghanistan, parts of Pakistan, is in essence the most dangerous zone on planet Earth. NATO's getting thumped here. The US is getting thumped here. Pakistan is getting punched here. And now the Iranians are getting touched by events going on in this blue zone as well. It is essentially a no man's land for law and order. Neither government, that is, neither Afghanistan nor Pakistan, has true effective control over any of these areas in blue. I know. It sounds bizarre because they're inside of their own country, but it's true. They don't effectively control these. They have armies there. They might have police there, but they don't control the ground. The peoples of this place do. We'll get to peoples tomorrow. So how is it the peoples of this place are so effective at defeating the armies of the world? Because they're effectively taking apart the United States and NATO and Pakistan all right this second. They've beaten the British and the Russians in the past, but I get ahead of myself. In a word, the reason these folks are so successful at defending their home field advantage is physical. The physical world of this place, as evidenced by this map, extremely tough terrain. In this border zone, there's upwards of over 100 peaks in excess of 23,000 feet in elevation. The Himalaya systems feed into this. The Karakoram Mountains, the Hindu Kush Mountains, the Pamir Knot. Google any of these things if you want more information. All of these are exceptionally tough, high, forbidding, inhospitable terrain. And the entire border of Pakistan and Afghanistan is about 1,500 to 1,600 miles of desolate nothingness and challenging physical extremes. In the north, it's actually very dense mountains and forests, and actually some open field land. As you progress to the south central, it gets very dry gulch river valleys, but deep gorges and steep mountains and cliffs. And as you progress all the way to the south side, closing in on the Iranian border, open desert, sun-baked sand for miles and miles and miles. This is a tough place any time of year. In the summers, it's extreme hot. In the winters, it's so cold, people actually stop fighting. That's right. The locals are so smart in this part of the world, they don't even fight in the wintertime. That's how inhospitable and tough and nasty this place is. Given this home field advantage, just of the terrain, a single soldier of Al-Qaeda, of Taliban, of whoever, I don't care, pick them, can have a shoulder-strapped rocket launcher, and they can effectively sit in a very narrow gorge and fend off the entire pass from any of the world's mightiest armies. The US and NATO are finding this out right now. The British and the Russians have found out in times past. But again, I get ahead of myself. How is it that this border between these two entities was ever carved out of this inhospitable hellhole in the first place? I'm glad you asked. It's got a lot to do with something called the Great Game, which culminated in this thing I do want you to know called the Durand Line. The Durand Line, an object of dispute which is still affecting current events in today's world. But what's this great game? You ever played Risk? You ever heard of the game of Risk? You played that, right? You have your colonial army from Europe or Russia, and you send out your troops around planet Earth to try to take over parts of the planet. This actually happened. And the game of Risk is based on this thing called the Great Game, which was a battle of control over Central Asia, Afghanistan included. Who was battling? Mostly the Brits and the Russians. For their part, the Brits controlled India during their colonial heyday in the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s. They took over what is now India. It was called British India. It encompasses the country in today's world of Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and even Burma to a certain extent. And the British were always pushing northward for further control, further territorial expansion, so they controlled more. And they also wanted to control more so that the Russians could control less, because the Russians were moving into Central Asia from the north. And they, for their part, were pushing southbound, trying perhaps to get through Afghanistan, trying to perhaps take over Iran so they could have some nice sea access on the Arabian Sea. The British and the Russians facing off, the Afghans in the middle. Now, the Afghans are something we call kind of ethnic Pashtuns. There's lots of different ethnic tribes in Afghanistan today. I'm going to stick with the Pashtuns, but these guys were in the pinch in the middle. This is an extremely resilient, tough group of people living off the land, almost nomadic lifestyle, who do not recognize anyone's government. None, never, they never have. But they were caught in the pinch during this great game between the Russian bear you see on his left and the British lion. And with friends like those, who needs enemies, of course. And what was going on in what's going to be known as Afghanistan later is both of these great powers pushing in from either side, the Afghans caught in the vice in the middle, both sides trying to play the Afghans one off of the other to ensure that the other team didn't gain control. You with me so far? The great game. Go pull out your risk board and have some fun with it. Afghan caught in this vice in the middle, and for their part, the British pushing in from British India to control more territory, came up against the Afghans time and time and time again and got their ass handed to them time and time and time again. They actually fought several named wars against the Afghan group. 1839 and 1878 were the first and second Anglo-Afghan wars, where the British lost, again, this inhospitable terrain, these tough folks which had the home field advantage. The British just can't win with their prim and proper red coats with their tea sipping coming in to fire in a straight line, and the Pashtuns just rip them apart. Now, the British finally got smart. And in 1893, they said, hey, why do we keep bleeding ourselves to death for on this northern border? We can't beat these guys, which means that the Russians probably can't beat them either coming in from the other side. So why don't we do this? Why don't we try to win them to our side? Let's have a peace agreement. Let's have a peace treaty. And what we'll do is we'll get our head guy to sit down with their head guy. We'll rustle up a head guy if we have to. And we'll establish some borders. This is the famous Durand Line that I want you to know.